Not the absence of heat, but the presence of something deeper, something that devoured
Back in the
light
mortal
and
realm,
life.
Ogun
This
and
wasn't fire, Ogun said, his voice low and sharp, like a blade honed against stone. It was something older, something hungrier. Ikenga stood a
Back
few
in the
paces
mortal
away,
realm,
his broad
Ogun
frame
and
casting
Ikenga
a long shadow
continue
over
their
the ruins. "I can still feel it," he said, "the echoes of their power. They didn't just take their essence, they emptied them." Ogun rose, his gaze hard. "No, not emptied, harvested." Ikenga turned. "Harvested for what?" Ogun's eyes narrowed. "War." The two gods moved through the ruins, their steps heavy with purpose. They examined
Back in the mortal realm, Ogun and Ikenga continue their investigation into the weird event discovered by the Jabari of Alkebulan.
The earth bore scars where the gods had fallen.
The ruins of shrines and temples stood like broken ribs jutting out of scorched soil, their sacred walls now ash and rubble.
The scent of divine essence, faint, bitter, and fading, lingered in the air. And at the center of it all, a hollow silence. Ogun knelt beside a shattered altar, his calloused fingers brushing the blackened stone. It was cold, too cold. Not the absence of heat, but the presence of something deeper, something that devoured light and life. "This wasn't fire," Ogun said, his voice low and sharp, like a blade honed against stone. "It was something older, something hungrier." Ikenga stood a few paces away, his broad frame casting a long shadow over the ruins. "I can still feel it," he said, "the echoes of their power. They didn't just take their essence, they emptied them." Ogun rose, his gaze hard. "No, not emptied, harvested." Ikenga turned. "Harvested for what?" Ogun's eyes narrowed. "War." The two gods moved through the ruins, their steps heavy with purpose. They examined the patterns scorched into the earth, the circular markings, the jagged lines that pulsed faintly with residual energy. "These marks." Ikenga knelt, tracing one with his fingers. "They're not random. They're channels, like roots." Ogun grunted. "Not roots. Something bled out here, and the veins carried it elsewhere." Ikenga looked up. "You're saying this was a ritual?" Ogun's jaw tightened. "Not a ritual. A harvest. They didn't just drain power, they redirected it. They followed the patterns outward, tracing the veins through the ruins, piecing together the shape of what had happened. It was Ikenga who found the first clue, a fragment of stone, half buried in the dirt, etched with symbols that shimmered faintly with dark energy. "This," Ikenga held it up, his voice low, "this is from the Orb of Anti-Creation." Ogun's eyes darkened. "Then it's worse than I thought." As they walked, Ogun's mind wandered to Amadioha, the storm that walked among gods. He spoke without looking at Ikenga. "Do you think he knows?" Ikenga frowned. "Know what?" "What he is," Ogun said. "What he carries inside him." Ikenga shook his head. "Amadioha is strong, but he's reckless. He thinks like a hammer, always ready to strike. He doesn't ask why." Ogun stopped and turned. "He doesn't ask why because he doesn't know how. I trained him, Ikenga. I saw what he could do, what he doesn't even realize he can do, and that's what scares me." Ikenga's expression hardened. "You're saying he's dangerous?" Ogun's voice dropped. "I'm saying he's more powerful than all of us. And the worst part? He doesn't know it. What if his powers get the better of him?" Ikenga's eyes darkened. "Then let's hope it never does." They continued their investigation, piecing together fragments of shattered shrines and scattered symbols. It was Ikenga who again first noticed the pattern, the way the markings stretched outward, not in chaos, but in direction. "They're moving," he said, his voice sharp. "Everything points south." Ogun's eyes narrowed. "To the water gods?" Ikenga nodded. "If they're draining power, they'll go where it flows. Rivers, seas, currents. They're heading for the guardian of the rivers. They are heading to Idemili, the river goddess. We must hurry." Ogun cursed under his breath. Then we don't have time. We have to intercept them before they reach him. Before they could act, messengers from the Divine Council arrived, gods who carried scrolls and orders sealed with gold. They spoke of deliberations, of meetings to determine the next course of action. Ogun barely let them finish. You think the monsters are waiting for your counsel? His voice cut through their words like a blade. You think they'll hold their fire until you decide which god speaks first? Ikenga stepped forward, his presence like a boulder breaking the tide. Enough talk. We move now. If the council has a problem with that, they can take it up with us after we've saved their skins. The messengers hesitated but said no more. Ogun turned to Ikenga. Gather what we need. We leave at first light. Ikenga nodded, his jaw set. And if we don't make it in time? Ogun's eyes burned. Then we make sure they remember what it means to fight a god. They moved like storms, not waiting for the heavens to approve their thunder. But what they could not see, what even their strength could not predict, was that storms do not only clear the skies, sometimes they shatter the ground. And as Ogun and Ikenga prepared for battle, the earth stirred and the heavens rumbled. The storm that walked among them was waking, and so too was the fire. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient walls of Oyo. The air carried the hum of distant drums, their rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat through the veins of the city. Amadioha stepped out of the tavern, his gaze lifting toward the hills that crowned the city's edge. He could feel it, a presence, sharp and unyielding, like the edge of a blade held to the sky. It wasn't just power, it was command, a force that bent the air around it, daring the world to kneel. This was Shango. And though Amadioha had not yet seen him, he knew they were bound to meet. But Amadioha was not here to fight. He had walked among mortals, listened to their voices, and seen their struggles. He had shared their meals and felt the weight of their fears. This, he thought, was what set him apart. He understood humility in a way that gods often ignored. And yet, even as he prepared to approach Shango as a recruiter, he felt the pull of something else. A storm beneath his skin, stirring at the thought of testing his strength. Not today, he whispered, pushing the feeling down. Today I build alliances. Meanwhile, Shango stood atop the hill, his silhouette framed by the dying light. He watched the city below, not with curiosity, but with ownership, like a king surveying his kingdom. His double-headed axe gleamed in his hand, its edges humming faintly with energy, as though eager to be. He felt it too, the pressure in the air, the hum of something vast and untamed. It was not fear that stirred him, but excitement. Finally, he muttered, his lips curling into a grin, a storm worth facing. Shango was no stranger to gods. He had fought them, broken them, and bent them to his will. But this presence was different. It was raw. Like lightning split from the heavens, it promised resistance, and in resistance, strength. What god hides behind this presence? He wondered aloud. And will he break as easily as the others? As Amadioha walked through the crowded streets, his eyes scanned faces and landmarks, searching for signs of Shango's trail. He stopped briefly at a shrine where a group of children danced, their voices raised in praise to the god of thunder and fire. He listened to their chants, feeling the weight of reverence behind their words. Shango was more than a god here. He was a legend, a symbol of strength and victory. And yet, Amadioha could not shake the thought that strength alone was not enough. Victory without wisdom was short-lived. In the hills above, Shango's thoughts mirrored Amadioha's, but from a different vantage. He had no interest in alliances or compromise. He sought proof of his own strength and the limits of others. This storm, he said, will either bow or break. Neither god knew the other's intent. Amadioha sought unity, believing that battles were fought with strategy as much as with strength. He saw Shango as an ally, someone whose power could turn the tides of the war. Shango, on the other hand, saw Amadioha as a challenge, a rival to be tested before earning his respect. And so, as the storm and fire moved toward one another, neither realized that their meeting would shape the fate of the heavens. The drums in Oyo grew louder, echoing through the hills. Mortals danced, oblivious to the tension rippling through the skies. But the gods knew. The storm and the fire were coming. Two gods walk separate paths, yet the same storm calls to them both. One seeks to build, the other seeks to break. And though their hands have not yet clashed, the thunder rolls and the fire burns. But what happens when the storm meets the fire? Will they temper each other or consume the world in their clash? The answer lies not in power but in purpose, and soon the purpose will be tested. Let me tell you the story of a goddess whose powers are greatly underrated. In the beginning, when the cosmos was a song not yet sung, Ayla emerged, not from fire nor light, but from the quiet strength of the earth itself. She was not fashioned as the gods of thunder or war, whose purpose was to strike and conquer. No, Ayla was born to cradle life in her embrace, to bind creation with law and morality, and to nurture the dreams of mortals and immortals alike. The Igbo people call her Ala, the earth itself, the giver of life and the keeper of death. Her soil bears the weight of nations, her rivers feed the roots of mighty forests, and her breath moves through every living thing. But Ayla is not merely the ground beneath our feet. She is the living planet, and her essence is woven into the fabric of the universe. Her domain is vast, encompassing not just the land, but the underworld as well. The dead find rest in her womb, their spirits joining the endless cycle of life and death that she oversees. She is the goddess of morality, the judge of actions, and the keeper of ancient laws, known as Omenala. To defy her is to defy the very foundation of existence. And yet she is misunderstood. For while Ayla is often seen as calm and nurturing, she is far more. She is the keeper of the underworld, the guardian of ancestral spirits, and the silent enforcer of balance. Her smile may be warm, but it conceals the strength of a goddess who carries the weight of creation itself. Her powers: earth dominion. Ayla commands the soil, stone, and roots. At her will, mountains rise and valleys deepen. With a touch, she can summon life from barren ground or reduce entire kingdoms to dust. Moral authority: she governs the moral laws of the world. Those who break these laws face her wrath, which manifests as sickness, misfortune, or even death. Underworld keeper: Ayla holds the souls of the dead, their essence bound to her domain until they are reborn. She can summon these spirits to serve her or banish them to eternal rest. Creative force: from her, the first seeds of life sprouted. She inspires artists, healers, and inventors, her breath guiding the hands of those who shape the world. Immense divine pressure: Ayla can release an overwhelming aura that bends the will of gods and mortals alike. It is said her mere presence can halt storms and silence even the boldest warriors. But the earth alone was not enough. As creation expanded, Ayla saw the waters spreading across the world, vast and unruly. She reached into her essence, drawing forth a fragment of her power, and shaped it into her sister, Idemili. The goddess of the oceans and waters, Idemili was not merely Ayla's creation, but her equal in spirit. Where Ayla nurtured the land, Idemili tamed the waters, guiding the tides and ensuring the rivers fed the soil. Together, they formed a balance. earth and water, stillness and flow. The bond between Ala and Idemili is unbreakable. It is said that when Ala walks the land, her roots stretch deep into the oceans, drawing strength from her sister's domain. Idemili, in turn, sends her tides to embrace the earth, keeping life abundant. Their unity is symbolized by the python, a creature sacred to both goddesses. The python serves as their messenger, slithering between land and water, carrying the whispers of the sisters to their followers. It is said that to harm a python is to invoke the wrath of both Ala and Idemili, a transgression few dare to commit. While Ala governs morality and creation, Idemili holds dominion over change and adaptability. Together they embody harmony, but even harmony can be tested. For the oceans are restless, and the python has carried troubling whispers to Ala's ears, whispers of shadows stirring beneath the waves. The python moved with purpose, its scaled body gliding effortlessly between the roots of the mangrove forest and the tides of the restless ocean. It was no ordinary serpent. It was the divine messenger, carrying the whispers of goddesses and the secrets of the waters. And its destination was Idemili, the goddess of the oceans and waters, the second-born of Ala. Let me tell you the story of a goddess as vast and unpredictable as the seas she commands. Idemili, the untamed current. Where Ala is the steady and nurturing force of creation, Idemili is change incarnate. The oceans bow to her will, and the rivers sing her name. She is the flow that shapes the earth, the tide that carries life, and the storm that challenges the unwary. Born of Ala's power, Idemili was gifted dominion over all waters, from the stillest ponds to the roaring seas. Yet her purpose is not merely to contain the waters, but to shape them, to guide them into harmony with the earth, and ensure that life thrives. Her powers: tidal mastery. Idemili commands the rise and fall of the tides. With a gesture, she can call forth waves that drown entire armies or draw back the seas to reveal hidden treasures. Hydromancy. The waters bend to her will, forming shields, spears, and whirlpools. Her warriors are trained in this art, channeling her gift to fight and defend. Oceanic telepathy. Idemili can hear the voice of every creature in the water, from the smallest fish to the mightiest leviathan. Through this, she maintains the balance of her domain. Shape-shifting, like the ocean itself, Idemili's form is fluid. She can take the shape of a great serpent, a tidal wave, or even walk among mortals in human form. Storm Weaver. When provoked, she can summon tempests to lash against the shores, her anger manifesting as hurricanes and tsunamis. Within Idemili's domain lies a formidable military force, her Ocean Guard, sworn to protect the waters from threats both mortal and divine. These warriors are not ordinary soldiers, but beings blessed with her power. The Tidal Spear. The elite warriors of Idemili, capable of summoning weapons from water and moving with the fluid grace of the tides. Their attacks mimic crashing waves, overwhelming their enemies with relentless force. The River Sentinels, silent protectors who patrol the rivers, their presence known only by the stillness of the water. They specialize in ambush tactics, striking from beneath the surface. The Leviathan Riders. Rare and fearsome, these warriors ride great sea beasts into battle. Each Leviathan is bound to its rider through a sacred ritual, their bond unbreakable. But even as Idemili's waters thrived under her rule, the tides began to whisper of unease. Her messengers brought troubling news, currents breaking their natural paths, waves crashing harder against the shores, and deep within the ocean, a presence that did not belong. It was her river sentinels who first noticed the change. They reported waters that tasted of metal and shadows that moved against the current. At first, Idemili dismissed it as mortal tampering, a shipwreck or a foolish attempt to mine the ocean floor. But then the attacks began. It came without warning, a hulking creature of jagged scales and glowing veins that tore through the currents as though they were air. Its claws carved the sea floor, and its roar sent ripples to the surface. It struck down 3 of Idemili's river sentinels before vanishing into the deep, leaving nothing but silence. The survivors described it in whispers. A beast not of this world, its form warped and unnatural. It did not belong to the waters, nor to the earth. And worst of all, it seemed to grow stronger with every attack. Idemili stood at the heart of her domain, the waters swirling around her like a living thing. She knew this was no ordinary threat. She called upon her ocean guard, summoning the tidal spear and the Leviathan riders to prepare for battle. The python brought word to Ayla, slithering through the roots of the mangroves to deliver its message. "The waters are restless," it hissed, "and the shadows grow bold." Allah, silent and watchful, felt the pulse of her sister's domain. The oceans were shifting, their balance disrupted. But this was not chaos. This was a purpose, a cold, deliberate hunger, and she knew where it came from. The Ocean Guard was the first to realize the truth. The beasts were not mere creatures. They carried within them fragments of something ancient and terrible, pieces of the Orb of Anti-Creation. But Idemili did not falter. She called her forces to arms, preparing to face the beasts when they came again. For the oceans were hers, and she would not surrender them. The winds above the ocean screamed as Ogun and Ikenga tore through the skies, their forms blurring with speed. The message from their investigation was clear. The monsters, armed with fragments of the Orb of Anti-Creation, had set their sights on Idemili. "She'll need help," Ogun growled, his bronze skin glowing faintly as the heat of the air rippled around him. "She won't ask for it," Ikenga replied, his voice steady but sharp. The ram-horned god of strength clenched his fist as he surged forward, his steps leaving faint streaks of light in the air. "Idemili doesn't run, she fights. Let's just hope we're not too late." The waters churned violently, the ocean darkening as the beasts descended. Idemili stood at the heart of her forces, her body shimmering with the fluid grace of the tides. Around her, the Ocean Guard prepared for battle. The tidal spear warriors formed concentric rings, their movements synchronized as if they were one body. Their weapons, conjured from the waters themselves, glowed faintly, reflecting the power of their goddess. Farther out, the Leviathan riders took their positions, their sea beasts snarling and lashing their tails. The water frothed as the Leviathans coiled, their immense forms blending with the waves. And then the monsters emerged. The first beast rose from the depths, its massive frame breaking the surface with a deafening roar. Its body gleamed with jagged black scales, and veins of glowing red coursed through its form like molten lava. The orb fragment embedded in its chest pulsed with power, casting an eerie light across the waters. The second and third beasts followed, each one unique in its terror. The second was a serpentine creature, its body stretching endlessly beneath the waves, its fins cutting through the water like blades. The third was the smallest, but the deadliest. A humanoid creature that moved so quickly it seemed to vanish and reappear in bursts, its claws trailing streams of energy that hissed against the water. Idemili raised her hand, and the waters obeyed. "Hold the line," she commanded, her voice carrying across the ocean. The tidal spear charged first. The warriors moved like waves, crashing into the beasts with unrelenting force. Their weapons struck true, slicing through the serpentine beast's fins and drawing black ichor from its hide. But the monsters did not falter. The serpentine beast lashed out, its tail sweeping through the ranks of the tidal spear, scattering the warriors like leaves in a storm. The smaller beast struck next, its speed overwhelming even the most disciplined formations. The Leviathan riders charged, their sea beasts roaring as they dove into the fray. One Leviathan coiled around the serpentine monster, its jaws locking onto its scaled body. Another struck at the first beast, its claws tearing into the glowing veins that lined its frame. For a moment it seemed the tide would turn, but the beasts fought back with a fury that no mortal or god could match. The orb fragments pulsed, their energy surging through the monsters, healing their wounds and amplifying their strength. The goddess of the waters rose above the chaos, her form shimmering as she ascended on a pillar of swirling waves. Her hands moved in fluid arcs, and the ocean followed her command. A massive whirlpool formed, drawing the serpentine beast into its center. "Enough," she said, her voice resonating like the depths of the sea. The whirlpool tightened, the water compressing with a force that shattered stone and drowned entire fleets. The beast writhed, its body twisting against the torrent, but it could not escape. The first beast roared and charged toward her, but Idemili raised her hand, and a wall of water surged upward, slamming into it with the force of 1,000 storms. The beast faltered, its claws scraping against the barrier as it tried to push through. But the orb fragments pulsed again, and the monsters grew stronger. The serpentine beast broke free of the whirlpool, its scales glinting as if freshly forged. The smaller beast moved faster, its strikes cutting through the Leviathan rider's formations. Idemili's breath hitched. She had faced many threats, but this was different. The fragments they carried were not merely weapons, they were pieces of something older, something darker. "Fragments of anti-creation," she murmured, realization dawning. The ocean guard was faltering. The tidal spear's formations broke apart, their ranks scattered. The Leviathan riders regrouped, but their beasts bore deep wounds, their roars growing weaker. Idemili descended into the fray, her form shifting as she plunged into the water. When she emerged, her body was no longer human. She had taken the form of a great sea serpent, her scales shimmering with every color of the ocean. Her eyes burned with divine fury as she coiled around the first beast, her jaws locking onto its orb fragment. For a moment, it seemed she would succeed. The fragment dimmed, its glow flickering as Idemili poured her strength into the attack. But the second and third beasts struck together, their claws and fangs tearing at her coils. The orb fragments pulsed once more, their energy surging like a tidal wave. Idemili cried out, her form wavering as the monster's combined strength overwhelmed her. The waters turned red. The beasts circled her, their movements slow and deliberate. They had no voices, no words, but their intent was clear. They were here to take her power, to strip her essence and leave her domain broken. The waters trembled, the waves stilling as the monsters prepared for the final blow. And then the ocean shifted. The ground beneath the waves began to tremble. Plates of the earth groaned, shifting and grinding against each other. The monsters hesitated, their heads turning as if sensing something they could not comprehend. A presence, a weight, and then the ocean roared was coming. The oceans fell silent. Not a single wave stirred, and the winds that had howled moments ago, as if nature itself was holding its. The monsters stopped, their glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. For the first time, forged by the Trickster to know no more hesitation, hesitated. Beneath the waves, the seafloor trembled. The plates shifted with a deep guttural groan. Bones of the earth were grinding together. Cracks formed along the ocean floor, faint at first, then widening. The waters churned, but it was not Idemili's doing. The monsters moved uneasily, their massive frames circling one another as attack that had not yet come. And then it did. The pressure came first, a force so immense that it rippled through the water like a pulse, pressing down on everything. The ocean guard, battered and broken, felt it and dropped to their knees, their weapons falling from their hands. The Leviathan riders clung to their beasts, their hearts pounding as the Leviathans whimpered, curling in submission. Idemili, wounded and struggling to rise, felt the pressure too. But it was not hostile. It was familiar, ancient, and unyielding. She knew what was coming, and a faint smile touched her lips even as her divine form wavered. And then from the depths she came. Ala rose slowly, her form emerging from the cracked ocean floor. She did not burst forth in fury, but ascended with the deliberate grace of the inevitable. Her skin was the color of rich soil, glowing faintly, as if the life of the entire planet coursed through her veins. Her hair, long and flowing, seemed to ripple like vines caught in an unseen breeze, adorned with blossoms that bloomed and withered in an endless cycle. Her eyes were a deep, luminous green, and they held no anger, no fury, only the calm authority of one who knew her place in the universe. The beasts turned fully toward her, their claws flexing, their movements tentative. They did not understand what they faced, but their bodies knew. Every cell screamed at them to run, but they did not know how. Allah's gaze swept over the battlefield, taking in the broken ocean guard, the fallen leviathans, and her sister, battered but alive. She said nothing at first. Instead, she extended her hand and the water obeyed. It rose gently, cradling Idemili's form and lifting her to safety. "You have done well, my sister," Allah said, her voice carrying through the water like the deep rumble of the earth. "Rest now." Idemili nodded weakly, her form shifting back to that of a woman as she allowed the water to carry her to the edge of the battlefield. The Ocean Guard and Leviathan riders, sensing their goddess retreating, followed her lead, retreating to the safety of the shallows. But Ayla did not retreat. Her gaze shifted to the monsters, who had begun to move again, their hesitation giving way to programmed aggression. They roared, their combined voices shaking the water, and surged toward her. Ala tilted her head slightly and her brow furrowed. The ocean answered. A wave of divine pressure radiated outward from her, slamming into the beasts with a force that brought them to their knees. The water darkened as her aura spread, a deep green light that suffused the ocean, bending it to her will. The beasts thrashed, their orb fragments glowing brighter as they drew on their stolen power to resist. One managed to rise, its claws reaching for her. Ala did not move. She simply raised an eyebrow. The pressure doubled. The water itself seemed to solidify around the monsters, holding them in place. Their roars turned to screams, sounds that no mortal ear could have borne to hear. For the first time in their existence, the beasts felt fear. Ala stepped forward, her bare feet touching the ocean floor as if she were walking on solid ground. Her vines moved with her, extending from her arms and shoulders, writhing like living things. One vine, sharp and glistening, shot forward, piercing the core of the smallest beast. It writhed, its orb fragment dimming as the vine wrapped around it, pulling it closer. Ala studied it, her expression calm but unreadable. "You were not born of this world," she said softly. "You do not belong here." The other two beasts roared and tried to retreat, their movements frantic. Ayla watched them go, her vines pulling the captured beast closer. She had no intention of stopping them. "Run," she murmured. "Tell your master what you've seen." The beasts disappeared into the depths, their forms fading into shadows. Ala turned her attention to the one she had captured. Her vines constricted, cracking the creature's hide and exposing its orb fragment. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the fragment, and the creature froze. The energy it emitted surged against her, but Ayla's power was greater. The vines pulsed, their glow intensifying as they wrapped tighter around the beast. "It is over," she said simply. The ocean stilled once more, and the battlefield grew quiet. It was then that Ogun and Ikenga arrived, their forms blurring into focus as they descended onto the scene. They froze at the sight before them, Ala standing amidst the wreckage, the captured beast bound by her vines, its power subdued. Ogun stepped forward, his hammer lowering slightly. "You did this." Ala turned to them, her expression as calm as ever. "It is done." Ikenga stared, his ram horns glinting faintly in the light of her aura. You took on these beasts alone? Allah smiled faintly. I am the earth, Ikenga. This is my domain. Ogun exhaled, his gaze shifting to the remains of the battlefield. We came to fight, but it seems we were not needed. You were needed, Allah said, her tone gentle but firm. And you will be needed again. This is not over. Ikenga frowned. The beasts, what were they? Pieces of something greater, Ayla replied, her vines tightening around the captured creature. And now we will learn the truth. Ogun nodded, his grip tightening on his hammer. Then let us prepare. If this was only a fragment of what is to come. The air was still, as though the ocean itself fit to take the fight to them. And beneath the forbidden planet's dark skies, the trickster felt a chill unlike anything he had ever known. The air was still, as though the ocean itself feared to disturb Ayla's presence. She stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, the shimmering vines encasing the captured beast, pulsing faintly with divine energy. Ogun and Ikenga stood a short distance away, their breaths heavy with the aftermath of their rush to the scene. The god of iron was the first to speak. Did you fight them? Alone? Ogun asked, his voice low and edged with disbelief. His hammer, so often the answer to conflict, now felt unnecessary in his hands. Ala turned her gaze toward him, her expression calm but unyielding. It was necessary, she replied. Her voice carried the weight of the earth, steady and absolute. These beasts came not as hunters, but as thieves. They sought not to conquer, but to steal what they could never create. Ikenga stepped forward, his broad frame radiating quiet awe. His ram horns gleamed faintly in the light of Ala's aura. And you subdued them, he said, more a statement than a question. You faced them as they carried pieces of the Anti-Creator's essence, and you still stood victorious. Ala inclined her head slightly. Their strength was immense, but strength alone is not enough against the earth. She turned her gaze to the captured beast, her vines tightening imperceptibly around its form. This one will answer for what it is. The beast emitted a low, guttural sound, its orb fragment pulsing faintly. Even in its subdued state, the fragment exuded a sinister energy, a constant reminder of its origin. Ogun narrowed his eyes, gripping his hammer tightly. What do you plan to do with it? He asked. Ala's eyes softened, though her resolve did not waver. I will study it. The answers we seek lie within the corruption it carries. She paused, glancing toward Idemili, who remained at the edge of the battlefield. But first, the injured must be healed. Idemili's form shimmered faintly, her divine presence weakened, but unbroken. As Ala approached her, the ocean goddess raised a hand. Do not speak of taking me to your domain, sister, Idemili said, her voice firm despite the strain it carried. The ocean is mine to protect. If I leave, it will rebel, and those imprisoned in its depths may rise. Ala hesitated, her expression unreadable. You have fought well, but you are gravely wounded. The waters cannot hold you if you fall. Idemili shook her head, the waves rising gently behind her as though affirming her resolve. I will not fall. Heal me here within my waters. Let the ocean cradle me as it always has. A faint smile touched Ala's lips, though it carried a hint of sadness. You are as stubborn as ever. As are you, Idemili replied. Ala raised her hand, and the earth responded. Roots and vines emerged from the ocean floor, wrapping gently around Idemili's form. They glowed with a soft green light, their energy flowing into the goddess's body. The ocean guard watched in silence, their reverence palpable. When the light faded, Idemili stood taller, her presence stronger. She met Allah's gaze and nodded. "Thank you, sister." Allah inclined her head. "Rest now. The ocean still needs you." With that, Allah turned to Ogun and Ikenga. "Come," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We have work to do." The two gods followed her as she began to ascend from the ocean's depths. As they rose, Ikenga the shadows, and far away, in a realm forgotten by the gods, the trickster began to feel the weight of his creation slipping from his control. The trickster stood at the center of his lair, a twisted domain of shadow and shifting illusions. The walls pulsed faintly with light that didn't seem to belong, as if reality itself was being bent and broken by his presence. He paced furiously, his staff clutched tightly in one hand, its obsidian surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed in time with his erratic movements. The beasts had failed. The two that had returned stood at the edges of the chamber, their monstrous forms hunched in submission. Their glowing veins dimmed as the energy of the orb fragments pulsed weakly, struggling to regain its former strength. "You had one task," the trickster hissed, his voice sharp as broken glass. "One simple task." He slammed the base of his staff against the ground, and the room shifted around him, the shadows bending to his fury. The beasts made no sound. They could not. They had no words, no will of their own, but their silence only deepened the trickster's rage. "You were made to be unstoppable," he continued, his voice rising. "You carry fragments of the Anti-Creator's power, and yet you allowed yourselves to be broken by her." His words hung in the air, but the beasts did not move. A faint ripple passed through the chamber, and the trickster froze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to him it felt like a knife sliding between his ribs. It was not the ripple of power that came from his orb fragments. It was something else. Something stronger. He turned sharply, his gaze snapping to the far corner of the room where the third beast should have stood, the one Allah had captured. "Gone," he muttered, his voice trembling. He clutched his staff tighter, his knuckles whitening. Captured, studied. He began to pace again, his mind racing. She will know. She will unravel everything. Another ripple passed through the air, stronger this time. It seemed to emanate from the ground itself, and for a moment, the trickster's illusionary world flickered. The shadows around him recoiled, as though something had pierced their veil. "No," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the source of the disturbance. "Not now, not yet." The air around him grew heavy, pressing against him like a storm building on the horizon. He felt it before he saw it, the raw, uncontained power radiating from the center of his domain. The very fabric of his lair seemed to twist and groan, struggling to contain it. And then he heard the voice. It was not a voice of words or language, but of intent. It spoke not to his ears, but to his very essence, a low, resonant vibration that shook him to his core. "You fear her." The trickster turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of the chamber, where the shadows had coiled the tightest, a figure began to form. It was not fully realized, its edges flickering and unstable, but its presence was undeniable. The shadow beings. The trickster swallowed hard, his throat dry. You are not ready." The figure tilted its head, its form shifting with a sound like cracking stone. "And yet I stir," it said, its voice deep and unrelenting, "because you falter." The trickster took a step back, his staff trembling in his hand. "It is not faltering. It is strategy. These things take time.
The shadow being's form shifted closer, its edges sharpening as if the force of its will was beginning to stabilize. "Time is not on your side," it said. "You speak of strategy, but you act in fear. You allowed them to escape." The trickster's jaw clenched, his frustration boiling over. "You think I wanted this? Do you know what she is? What she carries? Allah is not. She is nothing." The shadow beings interrupted, its voice cutting through the tricksters like thunder. "She is the earth, and the earth can break." The trickster's eyes narrowed, his fear giving way to anger. "You underestimate her, and you overestimate yourself," the shadow beings replied. The chamber trembled as its form grew more defined, its presence pressing against the trickster's mind like a tidal wave. "You created these creatures to serve me, but they are failures. Weak. You have wasted my power." The trickster's grip tightened on his staff, his knuckles white, not knowing that the voice he has been hearing is a projection of the anti-creator from his cage. "Weak," he spat. "I gave them fragments of the orb. I wove them from the essence of the anti-creator. They are not weak." The shadow being's form leaned closer, its gaze unrelenting. And yet they failed. The words struck the trickster harder than any blow. He looked away, his mind spiraling as the shadow being's presence pressed down on him. He had built this plan piece by piece, carefully crafting every element, and now it was unraveling before his eyes. But even as doubt gnawed at him, an idea began to form. "You said the earth can break," he said softly, his voice regaining some of its sharpness. The shadow beings said nothing, but the faintest ripple of approval passed through the air. The trickster straightened, his eyes narrowing as his mind raced. "If Allah can break, so can the others. She is not the only pillar holding this world together. If we shatter them one by one, the balance will crumble. And when balance falls, chaos reigns," the shadow beings finished, its voice a low growl of satisfaction. The trickster nodded, a faint smile creeping onto his lips. "Yes, chaos will reign, but first, we need more beasts, more power. We need the other fragments." The shadow being's form began to fade, its voice echoing as it disappeared. "Do not fail again, trickster. If you do, it will not be Ayla you should fear." As the presence vanished, the trickster exhaled shakily. He turned to the two remaining beasts, their forms still hunched in submission. "Get up!" he snapped, his voice sharp as a whip. The beasts rose slowly, their glowing veins pulsing faintly. The trickster stepped closer, his staff thrumming with energy. "We are not finished," he said, his eyes burning with renewed determination. "Allah thinks she has won. She thinks the earth is untouchable. But she will learn." He raised his staff, the runes along its surface glowing brighter. "They will all learn." The beasts roared, their voices shaking the chamber as the trickster's power surged. Deep within his lair, the shadows began to writhe once more, their movements faster, more deliberate. And far beyond, in the realms of gods and men, the winds began to shift. Amadioha stepped lightly through the streets of Oyo, his senses heightened. The city hummed with life. Vendors called out their wares, drums beat in steady rhythms, and the air carried the aroma of roasted yams and palm wine. Yet beneath this vibrancy, he felt something else, a quiet force, sharp and deliberate, brushing against the edges of his divine perception. It was Shango. The presence was impossible to miss. It loomed, steady and unyielding, like a dormant volcano waiting to erupt. Amadioha paused in the shadow of a towering baobab tree, his eyes narrowing as he focused. A faint trace lingered in the air, a residual energy unlike his own. Where his power moved like lightning, quick, bright and sharp, Shango's carried the slow burn of fire, simmering with restrained fury. He closed his eyes, reaching inward. The ability to trace divinity was not one he often used, But now it was necessary. Slowly the world around him dimmed, the sounds of Oyo fading into a distant hum. In the void, streaks of energy appeared, pale threads of power crisscrossing the city like veins. Among them, one shone brighter than the rest, a deep crimson trail that pulsed in time with a heartbeat. Red lightning. Amadioha opened his eyes and followed the trail, his movements deliberate but unhurried. The path led him beyond the bustling streets and toward the hills that overlooked the city. Here, the air grew heavier, charged with anticipation. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, as if the land itself acknowledged what was to come. At the peak of the hill, he stopped. The crimson trail vanished, its energy dissipating into the sky. He scanned the area, his gaze sharp and calculating. The air was alive with Shango's presence, but the god himself remained hidden. "I know you're here," Amadioha said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. The wind carried his words, but there was no response. He stood still, waiting. Moments stretched into silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of drums. Then a voice, deep, smooth, and laced with amusement, echoed from the shadows. "You're trespassing." Amadioha turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "So the great Shango speaks." The voice laughed, low and unhurried. "And the Igbo god of thunder walks uninvited into my territory. Bold, but foolish. I come with purpose," Amadioha said, his tone steady. "Not to provoke, but to seek your aid." "Seek my aid?" Shango's voice shifted, closer now. "Strange. I didn't think a god like you would beg." "I don't beg," Amadioha replied sharply. "But the coming war is bigger than us, Shango. The gods of this world will need to stand united." From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, his presence commanding. Shango's tall frame was cloaked in the deep red of the Yoruba royalty, his double-headed axe resting casually on his shoulder. His eyes burned with a fiery intensity, his grin sharp enough to cut through the tension. "United?" Shango said, his tone dripping with mockery. "And who decided you were the one to unite us?" Amadioha met his gaze evenly. "The signs are everywhere. The balance of the cosmos is faltering, and something far worse than us is coming. If we don't act together, it will destroy everything, gods and mortals alike." Shango tilted his head, his grin fading slightly. "And you think you're the one to lead this charge? What makes you so sure you can handle what's coming?" Amadioha hesitated for a moment, then said, "Because I have seen what the enemy is capable of. I have fought their creations, witnessed the destruction they bring. This is not a fight any of us can win alone." Shango studied him, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he closed the distance between them. Amadioha didn't flinch, his stance firm, as Shango stopped just a step away. "You're serious," Shango said, his voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "But let me ask you this. If it comes down to it, will you sacrifice your pride for the greater good? Or will you cling to it, like so many gods before you?" Amadioha's eyes narrowed. "If it means saving this world, I'll do what I must." Shango's grin returned, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see." Without warning, he moved, fast as a strike of lightning. His foot lashed out in a flying kick, aimed directly at Amadioha's chest. But Amadioha was faster. He sidestepped at the last moment, his movements fluid and precise. Shango landed lightly, turning to face him with a look of approval. "Not bad," Shango said, his voice laced with excitement. "But I've heard you rely on your thunder too much. Show me what kind of warrior you are without it." "Fight me without your power, Amadioha. Real hand-to-hand combat," Shango said. Amadioha exhaled slowly, his body relaxing as he took a measured step back. "Is this what you want? To test me?" Shango shrugged, spinning his axe in his hand before planting it firmly in the ground. "Call it curiosity. If you want my help, you'll have to prove you're worth it." Amadioha's lips curved into a faint smile. "Very well." Both gods shifted into fighting stances, the air around them crackling with unspent energy. The city of Oyo lay beneath them, blissfully unaware of the clash that was about to begin. As they squared off, Amadioha's mind calmed. He had expected the battle of divine power, and not hand-to-hand combat. Even at that, he still was worried. Orunmila had warned him to teleport them both to the planet at the edge of the universe if they were to clash, because their divine clash could split the planet in half. He did not want their clash to affect the people of Oyo. He has fallen in love with their way of life, and it seems Shango wants to protect them too, by suggesting a hand-to-hand compact without divine powers. He had come to recruit Shango, not fight him, but he knew now that this was inevitable. Their powers would remain untouched for now. Yet the tension in the air hinted at the storm and fire waiting to ignite. The gods' gazes locked, each one assessing the other. The world seemed to hold its breath as the first clash drew closer. And so as the storm met the fire, the battle began. Shango's laugh rang through the air like the crackle of fire in a dry forest, wild and unrelenting. Amadioha kept his stance firm, his eyes sharp, watching every subtle movement of his opponent. Shango's smile grew wider, an unsettling grin that spoke of both excitement and mischief. "Interesting," Shango said, his voice laced with amusement. "You're fast, faster than anyone I've fought in centuries. But it's not just speed, is it? It's that you see things before they happen. You saw my kick like it was moving in slow motion." Amadioha remained silent, his expression unreadable. Shango chuckled, rolling his shoulders. "This is going to be fun. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who makes me feel alive?" His tone shifted, his words carrying an edge of sincerity beneath the bravado. "Thank you for coming to find me. It's been far too long since I've had a real challenge." The god of fire shifted his stance, his movements precise yet deceptively casual. His hands moved fluidly, as though he were channeling energy from his core to his limbs. Amadioha recognized the technique instantly, a martial art as ancient as the gods themselves, one that blended strength, speed and precision into a single devastating style. "You've been training," Amadioha said, his voice calm but firm. "Of course," Shango replied with a smirk. "What else is there for a god of war to do when the mortals are at peace? But don't worry, I won't overwhelm you right away. Show me what you've got, Amadioha. Don't hold back." Amadioha's jaw tightened. Shango's tone was playful, but there was a weight behind his words. He wasn't testing for weakness, he was testing for worth. Then Shango moved. It was as though the air itself recoiled. He closed the distance between them in an instant, his fists blazing as he unleashed a flurry of punches that blurred into streaks of motion. Each strike came from a different angle, a whirlwind of force and precision. Amadioha didn't flinch. His senses, sharpened to the limits of godhood, tracked every movement. His arms moved in perfect harmony, deflecting each blow with calculated precision. But the speed, it was relentless. In less than a second, Shango had thrown what felt like 100,000 punches, each one carrying the weight of a falling star. The sheer force of his strikes tore through the air, creating shockwaves that rippled outward, reshaping the hill beneath their feet. Amadioha's focus deepened. He couldn't let a single punch land, not because he doubted his resilience, but because the force of even one blow could unleash chaos. If Shango's strike carried through, the shockwave alone could reduce the city of Oyo to rubble.
Shango laughed as he pressed forward, his movements growing wilder, more chaotic. "Deflecting, are we? What's the matter, Thunder God? Afraid of taking a hit?" Amadioha didn't answer. He was too focused on the task at hand, redirecting Shango's force, nullifying it before it could spread. His body moved like water, absorbing and dispersing the impact, but the strain was immense. "You feel it, don't you?" Shango taunted, his grin widening. "The weight behind my punches. You know what happens if even one gets through. That's why you're playing defense." Amadioha's eyes narrowed. He could feel the ground beneath them groaning under the strain, the tectonic plates shifting as the hill transformed into a valley. And yet, Shango's laughter only grew louder. "Come on, Amadioha, show me something real." Amadioha took a calculated step back, his mind racing. Every punch from Shango carried immense energy, but it wasn't just brute force. There was rhythm, a pattern disguised beneath the chaos. If he could find the break in that rhythm, he could shift the tide. As he deflected another strike, he spoke. "You're reckless, Shango." "Reckless?" Shango echoed, his laughter punctuated by another barrage of punches. "You call it reckless, I call it freedom." "Freedom without control is destruction," Amadioha replied evenly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "And what's wrong with a little destruction?" Shango retorted, his tone playful, but his eyes sharp. "It's the fire that clears the way for something new." The air around them crackled with tension. Shango's movements became faster, more unpredictable, but Amadioha remained steady. He could feel the subtle shifts in the air, the change in momentum, the rhythm beneath Shango's chaos. "You're holding back," Shango said suddenly, his voice dropping into a low growl. "I can see it. You're afraid of what might happen if you really fight me." Amadioha didn't deny it. He couldn't. The truth was, Shango was right. This wasn't just a battle between gods. It was a clash that could reshape the world if their powers were unleashed. Far away in the realm of Ayla, the earth groaned under the strain of their conflict. Cracks formed along the ground, rivers shifted, and mountains trembled. Ayla stood at the center of her domain, her eyes closed as she concentrated. "Ogun," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of strain, "you underestimate how much I am holding back." The god of iron stood nearby, his hammer resting at his side. He frowned as he felt the tremors beneath his feet. "I assumed your power was weakened from fighting the beasts." Ala opened her eyes, her gaze sharp. "My power is not weakened. I am absorbing the shock of a battle between two of the strongest forces in existence." Ogun exchanged a glance with Ikenga, who crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Should we stop them?" Ikenga asked. Ogun let out a dry laugh. "Stop them? Even if we both went, we'd only get in the way. This isn't a battle you interrupt, it's a storm you endure." Ala shook her head. "Orunmila warned me this would happen. I trust Amadioha to manage it, but I am worried. If Shango loses himself in this fight..." Ogun's expression darkened. "Shango hasn't had this much fun in eons. Right now, nothing matters to him but that battle." Ala's frustration was palpable, but she steadied herself. "We must trust Amadioha," she said, her tone firm. "He knows what's at stake." Back on the battlefield, Amadioha shifted his stance. He had analyzed Shango's rhythm, his movements, his unpredictability, and now it was time to strike. With a sudden burst of speed, he surged forward, his fist connecting with Shango's chest in a single devastating blow. The impact sent Shango skidding backward, his feet digging into the fractured earth. For the first time, Shango looked surprised, but then his lips curved into a grin. "Not bad," he said, his tone carrying a hint of approval. "Not bad at all." Amadioha stood tall, his gaze steady. "This isn't about fun, Shango. There's more at stake than you realize." Shango's grin widened, his hands flexing at his sides. "Oh, I realize it all right, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop." The air grew heavier, the tension palpable as the two gods squared off once more. Shango's laughter echoed through the fractured valley, and Amadioha's resolve only deepened. The battle had just begun. The air in Allah's realm was heavy with tension, the ground beneath her feet trembling faintly as she focused her immense power to stabilize the earth. Around her, the lush greenery of her domain seemed unnaturally still, as though even nature itself held its breath in deference to her struggle. Nearby, Ogun leaned against his hammer, his brow furrowed. His bronze skin glowed faintly with the heat of his own divine energy, but his posture betrayed an uncharacteristic unease. Beside him, Ikenga stood with arms crossed, his ram horns casting long shadows against the faint green luminescence that permeated Allah's domain. "They're pushing the earth to its limits," Ogun muttered, breaking the silence. Ayla's eyes remained closed, her focus unbroken. "They're only using their physical strength. If their divine power comes into play, the earth could split in two," Ikenga finished, his tone grave. Ogun's fingers tightened around the shaft of his hammer. "We should intervene." Allah's eyes snapped open, their green depths flashing with authority. "No," she said firmly. "Orunmila warned me this would happen. He has a plan, and so does Amadioha. We must trust them." Ikenga tilted his head, his expression skeptical. "I trust Amadioha, but Shango—" He trailed off, his lips pressing into a thin line. Allah allowed a faint, knowing smile. "Shango is unpredictable, yes, but he is not without reason. If there's anyone who can temper his recklessness, it's Amadioha." Ogun let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "You give them too much credit, my queen. Do you think Shango cares about reason right now? He's finally found someone who can match him, a challenge he's been craving for centuries. He won't stop until he's satisfied. And that's exactly why we don't interfere," Allah replied. She turned her gaze to the captured beast bound within her vines, its form twitching faintly as the fragment of the orb pulsed within its core. "Our focus should be here." Ogun stepped closer to the restrained creature, his hammer glowing faintly as he examined it. The beast's body, now stripped of its earlier ferocity, seemed almost lifeless, though its core continued to emit a sinister energy. "This thing," Ogun muttered, running a hand along the edge of his hammer, "it's not just a beast. It's something far worse." "It's a fragment," Allah said, her voice soft but laden with meaning. Ikenga frowned, stepping forward. "A fragment of the orb?" "Yes," Allah confirmed. "This creature is not merely carrying a fragment, it is the fragment, given form. The orb's energy has shaped it, molded it into a weapon." Ogun's jaw tightened. "If that's true, then destroying it won't be enough. The energy will persist, seeking a new form. We have to deactivate it." "And contain it," Ikenga added, his voice firm. Allah nodded, her vines tightening around the beast. "I've called for one of my best to assist us. If we can neutralize this fragment and study it, we may uncover the Trickster's plans." Ogun's gaze flicked toward her. "One of your best?" Allah smiled faintly. "You'll see soon enough." For a moment, silence settled over them, broken only by the faint hum of energy emanating from the restrained beast. Then Ikenga spoke, his tone lighter but no less serious. "Is this why your realm has been so unstable?" Allah sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Yes, the earth itself reacts to their battle. I've been absorbing the shockwaves to prevent widespread disaster." Ogun's expression shifted to one of faint regret. "And here I thought your power had waned after fighting those beasts. I underestimated you, Queen Allah." He inclined his head respectfully. "You've been holding the earth together while they fight." "Even I have limits," Ayla said, her voice tinged with weariness. "This is only their physical strength, Ogun. If they start using their divine power, they'll break the earth," Ikenga said grimly. Ogun let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Do you think we could stop them if it came to that?" Ikenga raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Ogun grinned, though it lacked his usual confidence. "I've fought side by side with you in wars, Ikenga. I know how strong you are. But those two? Together?" He let out a low whistle. "Even if we went,
We'd be lucky to last a minute.
Ikenga didn't laugh. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, his mind turning over the possibilities. Then what do we do? Alla stepped forward, her presence commanding. We trust Orunmila's plan, and we trust Amadioha. He knows what's at stake. And Shango? Ogun asked, his tone skeptical. Ayla's lips curved into a faint smile. Shango may not care for the consequences, but he does care for a good fight. Right now nothing matters to him except the battle, but even he knows the limits of this world. Ogun exhaled, shaking his head. Let's hope you're right, Queen, because if you're not... He trailed off, letting the weight of his unspoken words hang in the air. Alla turned her gaze back to the restrained beast, her expression hardening. For now, focus on this. The battle will end soon, but this war is just beginning. Amadioha's fist had left its mark. Shango's crimson armor gleamed under the fading sunlight, a faint scorch mark visible on his chest where the blow had landed. But rather than anger or pain, his expression was one of exhilaration. His grin widened, and his fiery eyes burned brighter. Finally, Shango said, rolling his shoulders. A god who knows how to strike. I've been waiting for this. Amadioha didn't respond. He stood firm, his breathing steady, his body poised for the next exchange. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The cratered ground beneath them bore testament to the sheer force of their clash. Oyo lay far below, its people blissfully unaware of how close they stood to annihilation. This couldn't go on. Amadioha tightened his fists. He needed to end this, or at least control it. His strength and speed were his greatest assets, but Shango's unpredictability made every move a gamble. Shango tilted his head, his grin softening into something almost contemplative. You're holding back again. I can see it in your stance. You're calculating, trying to decide how far to go without breaking something important. And you're not, Amadioha replied evenly. Shango laughed, the sound echoing like rolling thunder. Of course not. Restraint isn't my style. A real fight is like fire. It burns everything in its path. And leaves nothing but ash, Amadioha countered. Shango's grin widened. Exactly. Now show me more, Thunderer. Or are you afraid of what I might become? The words struck a chord. Shango wasn't just provoking him. He was testing him, pushing him to the edge, waiting to see if he would leap. Fine, Amadioha thought, if that's what you want. In an instant, he surged forward, his speed blurring his form as he closed the gap between them. Shango barely had time to react before Amadioha's fist connected with his side, the force sending him skidding across the fractured ground. Shango twisted mid-air, landing on his feet with a laugh. There it is! That's what I'm talking about! Without missing a beat, Shango retaliated, launching himself at Amadioha with a burst of speed that matched his own. Their fists met mid-air, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled through the sky and sent tremors across the earth. In Ayla's realm, the goddess winced, her vines tightening around the ground as she absorbed the strain. They're escalating, Ikenga said grimly. Ogun shook his head, his grip on his hammer tightening. They're only just getting started. Back on the battlefield, the two gods moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, their forms blurring as they exchanged blows. Each strike was a calculated masterpiece, Shango's raw strength and unpredictability clashing against Amadioha's precision and speed. The hill they fought on was unrecognizable, now a deep valley carved by the force of their battle. Shango launched a roundhouse kick that sliced through the air like a blade, but Amadioha ducked, countering with an uppercut that sent Shango reeling. You're better than I expected, Shango admitted, his voice laced with admiration. Most gods crumble after the first exchange, but you're keeping up. I'm not just keeping up, Amadioha replied, his voice calm but firm. I'm ahead. Shango laughed again, shaking the dust from his hair. Big words, Thunderer. Let's see if you can back them up. He moved again, faster this time, his body a blur of crimson and flame. Amadioha met him head-on, their fists clashing with a force that sent arcs of energy crackling through the air. But as the battle raged on, Amadioha began to notice something. Shango was adapting. His movements, once wild and unpredictable, were becoming sharper, more refined. He was learning, reading Amadioha's patterns, adjusting his attacks to counter them. This is why Orunmila warned me, Amadioha thought. Shango's greatest strength isn't his power, it's his ability to grow. Far below, the city of Oyo trembled. The mortals couldn't see the battle, but they felt its effects. The air grew heavy, the winds grew fierce, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated with the force of gods clashing above. Amadioha gritted his teeth. He needed to finish this before Shango's growth outpaced his own strategy. But even as he prepared his next move, Shango grinned, his eyes gleaming with newfound excitement. "You're strong," Shango said, his voice almost reverent, "but strength isn't everything. You know that, don't you?" Amadioha didn't respond. He moved first, closing the distance with a speed that defied comprehension. His fist struck Shango's chest, followed by a rapid succession of blows that forced the fire god onto the defensive. But Shango didn't falter. He absorbed the hits, his body twisting and shifting as he countered with a devastating strike to Amadioha's side. The impact sent the thunder god skidding backward, but he recovered quickly, his stance unwavering. The two gods stood apart, their breaths heavy, their gazes locked. Around them, the world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath for what would come next. Shango's grin returned, wide and wild. This is what I've been waiting for, a fight worth remembering." Amadioha's expression remained calm, but his mind raced. He could feel it, the moment approaching when their physical battle would escalate into something far more dangerous. He couldn't let that happen, not here. The battlefield groaned under the weight of divine power. The once proud hill, now a shattered valley, lay strewn with jagged rocks and deep fissures. Lightning crackled faintly in the air, accompanied by the ever-present heat radiating from Shango's flames. Amadioha and Shango stood across from each other, their bodies tense, their auras glowing with restrained might. But something shifted. Amadioha felt it first, a faint pulse of energy from deep within himself, warning him of the precarious balance they teetered upon. The strain on the mortal realm was becoming too great. Ayla's stabilizing influence could only do so much. Shango tilted his head, sensing it as well. His grin widened, unbothered by the implications. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, his voice a mixture of exhilaration and defiance. "This world is shaking under us. You're afraid it'll break." Amadioha's jaw tightened. "And you're not afraid?" Shango laughed, the sound echoing like the crack of a whip. "Why should I be? This is what gods are meant for, isn't it? To push the limits, to shake the heavens and the earth. Let the mortals feel our power." "This isn't about us," Amadioha said sharply. "If we keep this up, Oyo will crumble. The people will suffer." Shango shrugged, his fiery aura flaring slightly. "That's the price of greatness, Thunderer. They'll rebuild." Amadioha's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of white lightning sparking around his fists. "You don't believe that?" Shango's grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something deeper, a flicker of thought, of introspection. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Enough talk," Shango said, his tone lighter but no less commanding. "Let's finish this." Amadioha sighed, his mind racing. He had one shot, one chance to end this before their powers spiraled out of control. His thoughts drifted to Orunmila's words. "If it comes to it, teleport both of you to Akaru. The mortal realm cannot withstand the full force of your clash." Akaru. The name carried weight even among gods. It was a planet unlike any other, forged at the dawn of creation as a sanctuary and battleground for divine conflicts. Its surface was smooth and silver, reflecting the vast cosmos like a celestial mirror. The air shimmered with faint golden light, imbued with an energy that could absorb and diffuse the most destructive of forces. In ancient times, Akaru had been the arena where gods settled disputes. It was a place of honor, where strength and skill determined the outcome of conflicts without endangering the mortal realm. But those days of unity among the gods were long past. Now, Akaru lay abandoned, its surface untouched for centuries. Amadioha knew the choice before him. The fight couldn't end here, not in Oyo. If he didn't act now, the consequences would be catastrophic. He straightened, his eyes locking with Shango's. "This ends somewhere else." Shango raised an eyebrow, his grin returning. "Somewhere else? You think you can run from this fight?" "No," Amadioha said firmly. "I'm taking you to Akaru." Shango blinked, his amusement giving way to curiosity. "Akaru? That old arena?" He laughed, the sound filled with genuine delight. "I haven't fought there in ages." "You're full of surprises, Thunderer." Amadioha didn't wait for further commentary. He raised his hand, his divine energy surging as he summoned the power to bridge the gap between worlds. The air around them crackled and warped, and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Shango's grin widened as the energy enveloped them. "Good. I was starting to get bored of this place." The world around them blurred, the fractured valley dissolving into a cascade of light and sound. Far away, in the heart of Allah's realm, the goddess felt the shift immediately. The tremors ceased, and the earth grew still. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing as she turned to Ogun and Ikenga. "They've gone," she said softly. Ikenga raised an eyebrow. "Gone where?" "To Akaru," Allah replied, her tone both relieved and weary. Ogun let out a low whistle, leaning on his hammer. "That explains why the earth stopped screaming. Smart move." "Smart," Allah agreed, though her voice carried a hint of frustration. "But reckless. If Amadioha had faltered, even for a moment, they would have destroyed half the mortal realm." Ikenga crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "He didn't falter. He never does." Allah nodded, her gaze distant. "No, he doesn't. But I fear what's to come. Akaru may be strong enough to withstand their powers, but the two of them..." Ogun straightened, his grip on his hammer tightening. "They'll push each other to the limit. That's what Shango does. He drags you into his chaos. And Amadioha, he'll rise to meet it." Ikenga frowned. "Do you think Amadioha can win?" Allah's expression darkened. "This isn't about winning, it's about survival for all of us." When the light faded, Amadioha and Shango stood on Akaru. The planet stretched before them, its surface a perfect expanse of silver and gold. The air shimmered faintly, charged with the energy of countless battles fought and forgotten. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the planet's energy. Shango turned slowly, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's just as I remember it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The perfect place for a fight." Amadioha stood still, his gaze steady. "Here we can fight without restraint. No mortals will suffer, no lands will break." Shango's grin returned, fierce and wild. "Good, because I'm just getting started." Amadioha's eyes glowed faintly with white lightning as he raised his fists. "So am I." The silence of Akaru was shattered as the two gods clashed once more, their blows reverberating across the celestial expanse. This was no longer a battle for control or dominance. It was a storm meeting fire, raw and unrelenting. And on the horizon, the universe watched. The gods stood on opposite sides of Akaru's glimmering expanse, their forms haloed by the energies of the ancient battleground. The air between them buzzed with anticipation, charged with the tension of two forces poised to collide. Akaru, the god's arena, absorbed the weight of their presence, its mirrored surface shimmering faintly as if preparing itself for the storm to come. As they squared off, a question lingered, unspoken yet heavy in the silence. Who would prevail? Let's take a step back to analyze these two powerhouses. To understand this battle was to understand the warriors. Shango, the Yoruba god of fire and thunder, radiated raw, untamed strength. His crimson lightning burned with the fury of molten fire, a relentless force that consumed everything in its path. He was physically imposing, his body a testament to countless battles won through sheer will and martial skill. Every muscle rippled with the memory of wars fought long before the mortal realm had taken shape. Yet it was not just his strength that made Shango formidable. It was his adaptability. Shango thrived in chaos, his movements fluid and unpredictable. With each clash he grew stronger, his instincts sharpening, his power evolving. This limitless potential made him a nightmare for even the most disciplined opponents. Amadioha, the Igbo god of justice and thunder, was a force of balance. Where Shango's fire burned wild and hot, Amadioha's lightning was precise, a white-hot blade that struck without error. He was smaller in stature, but no less imposing, his body honed for speed and agility. To Amadioha, every movement in battle was calculated, every strike deliberate. If Shango was the storm that razed cities, Amadioha was the scalpel that carved through the heart of chaos. On the surface, they were opposites. But beneath that contrast lay a truth both exhilarating and terrifying. They were two sides of the same coin. Physical strength versus speed. In sheer physical power, Shango stood unmatched. His punches could shatter mountains, and his kicks sent shockwaves that rippled across the land. He had trained relentlessly, mastering ancient forms of combat that combined raw strength with refined technique. But Amadioha's speed was a different kind of power. He moved with the grace of a lightning strike, his reflexes so sharp that even Shango's rapid assaults seemed sluggish in comparison. Where others would falter under Shango's relentless onslaught, Amadioha could predict and counter, turning the fire god's strength against him. The lightning they wield. Shango's crimson lightning was a rare and dangerous gift, a fusion of fire and thunder that burned hotter than the heart of a volcano. It crackled with life, each bolt carrying the force of an inferno, capable of reducing even divine barriers to ash. Amadioha's lightning, by contrast, was pure. White in its natural state, it embodied the essence of justice, sharp, precise, and unyielding. But his power did not stop there. When he pushed himself, his lightning turned blue, an ascendant form that carried greater destruction. And when he unlocked the depths of his divine potential, his lightning became purple, a force so overwhelming that it tore at the fabric of reality itself. In their base forms, Shango's crimson lightning held the advantage. Its destructive potential far exceeded Amadioha's white strikes. But in raw, unrestrained power, Amadioha's purple lightning was unparalleled, a force that no god had ever faced and survived. Battle experience versus battle IQ. Shango was a warrior through and through, his centuries of battle leaving him with a wealth of experience that no amount of training could replicate. He had fought gods and monsters alike, his body bearing the scars of conflicts that had shaped the very heavens. His instincts in combat were unmatched, allowing him to adapt and overcome even the most unexpected challenges. Amadioha, however, possessed something that countered Shango's experience: his mind. He was a strategist, a tactician who saw the battlefield not as a chaotic brawl, but as a puzzle to be solved. Every move he made was part of a larger plan, each feint and strike calculated to exploit his opponent's weaknesses, divine power and potential. If the fight remained physical, Shango's durability and adaptability would give him an edge. He was the kind of opponent who grew stronger with each clash, his power feeding on the energy of battle. There was no cap to his growth, no limit to how far he could push himself. But Amadioha carried something more profound. Through Orunmila's guidance, he had unlocked a power that placed him on a level no god could rival. If he tapped into that potential, the fight would end swiftly. Shango, for all his strength, would have only a 1 in 10 chance of victory. Yet, therein lay the danger. Orunmila had warned Amadioha that his greatest strength could also be his undoing. The power he wielded was tied to his role as the enforcer, a force of cosmic balance that could not be unleashed without consequence. To tap into it was to risk becoming something far beyond himself, and Shango knew this. This clash was not merely a test of strength or skill. It was a meeting of philosophies, chaos against order, fire against precision. As they stood on Akaru, the air between them shimmering with latent energy, the planet itself seemed to recognize the significance of what was about to unfold. Shango stood in the middle of Akaru's shimmering expanse, the double-headed axe resting easily on his shoulder. The planet's silver-gold surface reflected the faint flicker of his red lightning, casting an almost ethereal glow around him. He ran a hand along the edge of his weapon, a contemplative expression softening his usually mischievous grin. "It's been a while since I've fought here," Shango said, his voice carrying a faint note of nostalgia. This place, this was the gods' proving ground. Every clash, every victory, every defeat, the echoes are all still here. Amadioha watched him silently, his stance relaxed but ready. He could feel the weight of Shango's words, the history embedded in the very air of Akaru. "I was the champion here, you know," Shango continued, glancing at Amadioha with a sly smile. "Undefeated. I quit because no one could match me anymore. There's no fun in being invincible." Amadioha tilted his head slightly, his tone neutral. "And now?" Shango chuckled, the sound rich and full of amusement. Now I'm fighting you, and I've got to say, I didn't think there'd be anyone left who could make me feel like this. You're strong, Thunderer, so tell me, why have you never fought here before?" Amadioha's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained sharp. "I prefer the adventure of battle to the rules of the ring. Fighting here has its traditions, but it lacks freedom." Shango raised an eyebrow. "Freedom? You think fighting here is limiting?" "No," Amadioha replied, "but it's not my style. Besides, this planet may be where gods settle their differences, but none of the ones I've had problems with ever dared invite me here." Shango burst out laughing, the sound echoing across the mirrored plains. "Oh, scary! I get it now. No one wanted to face you here. Fighting you has shown me why. I might be the only one crazy enough to believe I can beat you." Amadioha crossed his arms, his expression unchanging. "You think you can win?" "Of course," Shango said without hesitation. "Ogun and Ikenga might hold their own, but they wouldn't beat you. Me, different story." "Funny you think that," Amadioha replied, a faint hint of humor in his tone. "Speaking of Ogun," Amadioha said, "I met him during my trials. He was supposed to teach me strategy in battle. He's cool. I respect him." Shango nodded. "Ogun is one of the cool ones. He taught me the same. Strategy, precision. He's a master." Shango's eyes glinted as he held up his double-headed axe. "He's more than that. Ogun is the greatest blacksmith. He's the one who made this, my Oshe." He ran his fingers over the weapon's polished surface, his tone shifting to one of pride. "Of course, I got the materials myself. Legendary stuff. Even a god has to risk his life to get it. This axe? Probably the strongest weapon ever forged." Amadioha's gaze lingered on the weapon for a moment before he looked back at Shango. "Enough talk." Shango grinned, raising the axe with ease. "You're right. Let's get started." The air grew heavy as Shango's red lightning began to crackle more fiercely, dancing along the edges of his axe. He shifted into a fighting stance, the excitement in his eyes unmistakable. Amadioha, unarmed, stood his ground. But then, almost imperceptibly, he raised his hand. White lightning gathered at his fingertips, weaving itself into a shimmering blade of pure energy. The sword hummed softly, its brilliance a stark contrast to the fiery red glow of Shango's oshe. Shango's grin widened. "Impressive. How'd you do that?" Amadioha didn't answer immediately, his gaze focused. Finally, he said, "Maybe I'll teach you. That depends on how well your shiny weapon holds up against it." Shango laughed, the sound loud and full of joy. "You're on, Thunderer!" The two gods moved simultaneously, their weapons colliding with a force that shook the planet. Red lightning clashed with white, releasing a blinding shockwave that rippled outward. Akaru absorbed the energy effortlessly, its golden glow brightening as it drank in the divine power. The battle began in earnest. Shango surged forward, his axe blazing with crimson energy. Each swing came with overwhelming force, the air itself bending under the weight of his strikes. Amadioha met him head-on, his sword of light deflecting the blows with precision, but the power behind each clash was undeniable. "You're fast," Shango said, his voice filled with exhilaration as their weapons locked for a moment. "But how long can you keep up?" Amadioha didn't respond. He focused on Shango's movements, using his speed to dodge and counter. But Shango's strength was relentless, each attack faster and heavier than the last. The tide of the battle began to shift. Amadioha had taken 5 direct hits, each one a bone-shaking blow that sent him skidding across the mirrored ground. Shango's grin grew wider with every strike. "Is this it?" Shango shouted, his voice booming with disappointment. "Is this all you've got, Thunderer? You disappoint me." Amadioha pushed himself to his feet, his chest heaving. He knew what Shango was doing. The fire god thrived on pushing his opponents to their limits, drawing out their full strength. Their weapons clashed again, the sound echoing across Akaru. The force drove Amadioha to his knees, his white lightning flickering faintly. Shango lowered his axe slightly, his grin faltering. "I expected more." Amadioha exhaled slowly, rising to his feet. His stance shifted, and the air around him grew still. A faint purple glow began to emanate from his markings, spreading across his body like cracks in stone. His eyes, once glowing white, turned an intense shade of violet. The lightning around him changed, sparking and crackling with an energy that felt otherworldly. Shango froze, his grip on his axe tightening. He could feel the shift in power, the sheer weight of Amadioha's presence. A normal god would have fled at the sight of it. "But Shango," he laughed. The sound was wild, unrestrained, and filled with delight. "There it is!" he shouted, his voice brimming with excitement. "That's what I've been waiting for!" His red lightning flared, surging through his axe as he stepped forward, his expression one of pure joy. "Let's do this for real, Amadioha. Show me you've got what it takes to lead the alliance." As the two gods prepared to clash again, the scene shifted, leaving the mirrored plains of Akaru behind and returning to the quiet tension of Allah's realm. Allah stood in the heart of her realm, her presence steady but faintly diminished. Though she remained the embodiment of the earth's strength, the strain of holding the world together during Amadioha and Shango's clash had taken its toll. Around her, the vines and roots that wove through her domain pulsed with faint energy, a reflection of her focus and resilience. Beside her, Ogun and Ikenga spoke in hushed tones, their gazes occasionally flicking toward the restrained beast bound by Ayla's divine vines. The creature pulsed faintly with an unnatural light, its essence radiating a quiet, malevolent energy. "We need to send word to Orunmila," Ikenga said, his voice firm. He needs to see this for himself. Ala nodded, her gaze never leaving the beast. Agreed. He foresaw this, but there is more to this fragment than even I anticipated. She extended her hand, and a small bird of glimmering stone took shape from the air, its eyes glowing faintly green. With a soft hum, it flapped its crystalline wings and took flight, disappearing into the horizon. Far away, the bird reached Orunmila, who stood in quiet contemplation within his sanctuary of swirling runes and ancient tomes. The message from Allah unfurled before him, its meaning clear. His expression remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He had expected this. The threads of fate had already whispered their warnings to him. Still, he murmured to himself, a fragment given form, that is troubling. With a deliberate motion, he began gathering his tools, a small tray etched with divination symbols, a staff carved with intricate patterns, and a pouch of sacred chalk. He had seen much in his countless years of guiding the gods and mortals alike, but there was something about this moment that carried an unusual weight. "I must see this for myself," he said softly, his voice carrying an undercurrent of urgency. But as Orunmila prepared for his journey, another figure was already within Allah's realm, Ibiru. The celestial moved through the forest of Allah's domain with silent purpose, his golden robes shimmering faintly in the green light of the goddess's realm. He was tall and lean, his face serene yet bearing faint lines of sorrow, as though the weight of countless lifetimes rested on his shoulders. Ibiru's hands were never still, constantly tinkering with small devices that floated around him like a constellation of tiny stars. Each device pulsed with a faint glow, emitting soft hums as they shifted and rearranged themselves under his touch. He approached Allah with a bow so low that it seemed almost reverent. "My queen," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You called, and I have come." Allah turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Ibiru," she said, her tone warm despite her weariness. "It has been too long." "I am here to serve," he replied simply, straightening but keeping his gaze respectful. Ogun leaned closer to Ikenga, muttering under his breath. "Ibiru, I didn't think he'd still be around after all this time." Ikenga nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's loyal to Allah, utterly. They say he owes her everything." Indeed, the story of Ibiru was one that few knew, but those who did spoke of it with both awe and sorrow. But we will tell it another time. Long ago, before the mortal realm had taken its current shape, Ibiru had been a god of progress and invention, a skill that runs in his celestial family. He was not a warrior, nor a leader, but a builder, a creator of wonders that defied comprehension. The stars themselves bore witness to his genius, as his creations illuminated the heavens and brought order to the chaos of the cosmos. But Ibiru's brilliance was also his undoing. In his pursuit of perfection, he had created something that should never have existed, a machine so powerful that it threatened to unravel the fabric of reality itself. It was a machine that could convert energies and at some threshold could be converted to source energy, which is the same material that the human soul is made of. Ibiru had done this to reduce the violent in the mortal world, as this was a time of war and genocide among the mortals. When elder gods took sides and supported the mortals that prayed to them the most, Ibiru discovered that the cause of violence and war is due to the dark emotions like greed, fear, anger, and he thought to himself, what if these emotions can be converted? Just like the energy humans give out from their soul when they pray, What if these negative energies could be extracted and converted to positive energies? And so he began building. But the elder gods did not like this. They needed humans in despair and anger and greed so that human can turn to them and pray to them for help. This is because the prayer of a mortal contains part of their soul, which serves as power for these elder gods. They were not ready to give up on a wonderful and powerful resources. The elder gods, furious and fearful, turned on him. They cast him down, stripping him of his divine standing and banishing him to the void. They did not want the rise of another Madinga, the god who threatened their existence and power in the past. It was Ayla who found him there, broken and alone, his creation scattered and forgotten. She saw not the folly of his mistakes, but the potential of his mind. She reached out to him, offering him a chance to create again, not through punishment, but through service. "Come with me," she had said, her voice gentle yet firm. "Serve the earth, and I will give you purpose once more." From that day forward, Ibiru had devoted himself entirely to Allah. He became her most loyal servant, using his gifts to aid her in protecting the balance of the world. Under her guidance, he created technologies that bridged the divine and mortal realms, empowering humanity in ways that ensured their survival. For centuries, Ibiru traveled the mortal realm in disguise, teaching his knowledge to those chosen by Allah. He appeared as a master craftsman, taking on apprentices from the Igbo kingdom and guiding them in the ways of invention. The tools and methods he shared were gifts from Allah, carefully chosen to uplift without corrupting. To Ibiru, Allah was not just his queen, she was his redeemer, his savior. Now, as he stood before the restrained beast, his expression was one of quiet fascination. He moved closer, his hands gesturing in fluid motions as his devices floated around him, scanning the creature's core. "This is remarkable," Ibiru murmured, his voice tinged with both awe and concern. "The fragment has shaped this beast entirely. Its form, its strength, it's all drawn from the energy of the orb." Allah nodded. "Can it be deactivated?" Ibiru's hands moved faster, his devices humming softly as they analyzed the fragment. "The energy is ancient, older than most of the gods," he said. "But it is not indestructible. If we can disrupt its connection to the orb, we can neutralize it." "And can you do that?" Ogun asked, his tone skeptical. Ibiru glanced at him, a faint smile on his lips. "With time, yes. But this will not be simple. The fragment's energy is deeply intertwined with the beast's essence. Separating them without destroying both will require precision." Allah placed a hand on Ibiru's shoulder, her gaze steady. "You have always found a way, Ibiru. I trust you will find one now." Ibiru bowed his head. "I will not fail you, my queen." As he turned back to the beast, his devices shifting and rearranging themselves with intricate precision, a new presence began to approach Ayla's realm. Orunmila was coming. The mirrored plains of Akaru had become unrecognizable, the once pristine surface now scarred by deep fissures and glowing with residual energy from the clash of gods. Amadioha stood tall, his body radiating a fierce, violet glow, his purple lightning crackling violently around him. Shango, bloodied but grinning, rose from a crater he had created upon impact, his red lightning flickering across his axe like molten veins of power. For the first time, Amadioha fully unleashed the strength that the elder gods feared. The purple lightning coursed through him, not as a tool, but as an extension of his being, its destructive might shaking the very core of Akaru. He moved with precision, his hand rising as Shango lunged. With a flick of his fingers, Shango was pulled into the air, suspended by an invisible force. Amadioha's eyes gleamed as his newfound telekinesis locked onto Shango's form. "You're powerful, Shango," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of thunder. "But power without precision is chaos. Before Shango could respond, a torrent of purple lightning surged upward, slamming into him mid-air. The force sent ripples across the battlefield, the energy so intense that Akaru's reflective surface dimmed under its strain. Shango roared, not in pain, but exhilaration, even as his body was thrown backward. But Amadioha wasn't finished. With a motion as smooth as a tide, he pulled Shango down with his telekinesis, slamming him into the ground. The impact sent shockwaves tearing through the planet, the cracks beneath their feet widening. Yet Shango laughed. His voice echoed across the battlefield, wild and joyous. "Yes, this is what I've been waiting for. Show me more, Thunderer." Amadioha's brow furrowed, his expression betraying a flicker of frustration. This was the power that had cowed elder gods, the force that could end entire pantheons. And yet, here was Shango, reveling in it, growing stronger with every strike. As the fight continued, Shango's adaptation became evident. His movements grew sharper, more fluid, his strikes faster and more precise. The red lightning that surged from his body now clashed evenly with Amadioha's purple, the two divine forces crackling in a furious dance of light and sound. Each clash released shockwaves that rippled across Akaru's surface, the planet groaning under the weight of their powers. Amadioha's focus sharpened. He could see the toll the battle was taking, not just on the planet, but on both of them. Their breaths came heavier, their movements fractionally slower. Divine power was not infinite, and they were nearing their limits. But Amadioha had no intention of letting this battle drag on. He began to channel his energy, the purple lightning coiling around him in spiraling arcs. The air grew heavy, vibrating with the promise of an attack that could end it all. Shango noticed the shift immediately. His grin faded, replaced by a look of steely determination. He raised his Orisha, the axe glowing brighter as he poured his own energy into it. The weapon pulsed with red lightning, its edges crackling with lethal intent. "So you're finally getting serious," Shango said, his voice low but tinged with excitement. "Good. I've been waiting for this." Before Amadioha could strike, Shango acted. With a speed that defied comprehension, he hurled the Orisha at Amadioha. The axe moved faster than the speed of light, a streak of crimson energy cutting through the air. But to Shango's shock, Amadioha dodged it. For the first time in the battle, Shango's confidence wavered. He had been certain, absolutely certain, that Amadioha wouldn't be able to react in time. The Orisha had never missed before. Amadioha's eyes narrowed, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You thought that would work?" Shango's grip on his power faltered, but his mind raced. How had Amadioha evaded an attack at that speed? The answer lay in Amadioha's gaze, which glowed faintly with a new intensity. For the first time, Amadioha had activated a skill he had long possessed but never needed to use, a glimpse into the future. As he prepared his finishing move, the skill had triggered, showing him the split second in which Shango's Orisha would have severed his arm. Amadioha had reacted accordingly, shifting just enough to avoid the strike entirely. The battlefield fell silent. Shango stood motionless, his hands clenching and unclenching as he processed what had just happened. For the first time since the battle began, he was genuinely shocked. "You," Shango began, his voice softer, almost awed. "You dodged it." Amadioha didn't respond. He held his stance, his purple lightning crackling ominously around him. For a moment, neither god moved. But even in the stillness, they both felt it, the shifting of the planet's core. Akaru, the indestructible arena, was reaching its limit. Its surface remained stable, but deep below, the energy it had absorbed was beginning to tear it apart. The silence between them spoke volumes. They had pushed each other further than they had ever been pushed before. For all their differences, they now understood each other in a way no one else could. Both gods were exhausted. Their breaths came heavy, their divine energies flickering faintly as their reserves dwindled, but neither was willing to back down. Amadioha's mind raced. He had one ace left, the source power he had unlocked with Orunmila's guidance, but Orunmila's warning rang in his ears. Do not use it against Shango, the cost will be too great. Shango, too, had a final move, an attack he had kept hidden until now. The Divine Eradicator, a technique that could extract all of an opponent's power in a single blow. But Shango knew the cost. If he used it, the planet would not survive. They both knew. If either unleashed their ultimate attack, the consequences would be catastrophic. Akaru would shatter, and the ripple effect would destroy neighboring stars, planets, and even celestial bodies. But there had to be a winner. Neither would surrender. The two gods stood across from each other, their auras flickering with restrained power. The battlefield was quiet, but the air between them crackled with tension. Shango grinned, his confidence returning. "So, Thunderer," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "What's it going to be? Are you ready to finish this?" Amadioha didn't answer immediately. He steadied his breathing, his purple lightning glowing faintly around him. Finally he said, "Are you?" And with that, they prepared to clash one last time. Back in Isla's realm, Orunmila stood with the quiet composure of a being who had seen countless ages come and go. His arrival had been swift and deliberate, his presence commanding yet calm. Before him stood Isla, her strength evident despite the strain of recent events, and Ogun and Ikenga, their expressions a mixture of respect and concern. Ogun spoke first, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Orunmila, you've seen what we're dealing with. The fragment is not just dangerous, it's a piece of the orb itself given form. It's alive. Ikenga nodded in agreement, his ram horns glinting faintly in the ambient light of Allah's domain. Our investigation led us to Idemili. From there, we followed the trail to this beast, and now we're here because it's the safest place for it." Orunmila's gaze moved to the restrained creature, his expression unreadable. The beast twitched faintly, its core glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Ibiru worked nearby, his devices humming softly as he meticulously examined the fragment's energy. Orunmila approached the beast, his steps slow and deliberate. He studied it for only a moment before speaking. This is more than I anticipated." His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "If this fragment remains unchecked, it could destabilize not just this realm, but the balance of creation itself." Ogun crossed his arms, his tone firm. "That's why we called you. You're the only one who can make sense of this." But Orunmila's attention shifted, his eyes narrowing as if seeing something far beyond the present. "This is not the only danger we face," he said softly. "Amadioha and Shango, they are fighting on Akaru." Allah's brow furrowed, her calm demeanor giving way to concern. "You knew this would happen." "I did," Orunmila admitted, his voice steady. "But even I could not foresee how far they would push each other. The balance is already strained, and Akaru—" He paused, his gaze darkening. "Even that planet has its limits." Ogun frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Orunmila said, turning to face them, "that if their battle continues, the planet will collapse, and the resulting destruction will ripple across the cosmos." Ikenga stepped forward, his tone serious. "Then we have to stop them." Orunmila smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried centuries of wisdom. "And how do you propose we do that, Ikenga? Do you think you have the power to stand between them?" Ogun let out a dry laugh. "He's right. Those two. It'd take more than both of us to hold them back." Ala stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "You underestimate Orunmila. There is a reason he is who he is. If anyone can stop those two right now, it's him." Orunmila inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Ayla. But there is no time to waste. With that, he turned and disappeared into a swirl of shimmering light, leaving the realm of Ayla behind. The moment Orunmila stepped onto Akaru's surface, he felt the weight of the battle. The air was thick with divine energy, the ground beneath his feet trembling as if the planet itself were crying out. In the distance, he saw them, Amadioha and Shango, poised for their final clash. Their powers surged around them, purple and red lightning crackling violently as they prepared to unleash their ultimate attacks. The energy radiating from their auras was overwhelming, shaking the very fabric of the planet. Orunmila's expression darkened. He had no time for hesitation. Closing his eyes, he raised his staff, its intricate carvings glowing with ancient power. The air around him grew still, the crackling of lightning fading into silence. He opened his mouth, chanting words in a language older than time itself, his voice resonating across the battlefield. And then time stopped. The world froze. Amadioha's purple lightning halted mid-strike, its arcs suspended in the air like jagged shards of glass. Shango's Oshe, glowing with red fury, remained inches from his grasp, the light from its edges frozen in place. The gods themselves were immobilized, their expressions locked in determination and fury. Orunmila stepped forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He approached Shango first, his gaze falling on the Oshi. Reaching out, he touched the tip of the axe, his fingers glowing faintly as he activated the failsafe Ogun had built into the weapon. With a soft hum, the Oshi's glow dimmed, its energy deactivated. Then, Orunmila turned to Amadioha. He placed a hand on the Thunder God's chest, his expression softening slightly. "Forgive me, my friend," he murmured. With another chant, he channeled his power into Amadioha, deactivating the flow of purple lightning that surrounded him. Stepping back, Orunmila raised his staff once more. With a single click of his fingers, time began to flow again. Amadioha and Shango collapsed to the ground, their bodies heaving with exhaustion. For a moment, they lay still, their minds struggling to process what had happened. Shango was the first to speak, his voice hoarse but tinged with humor. "What just happened?" Amadioha pushed himself up, his gaze sharp as he scanned the battlefield. His lightning was gone, the purple glow no longer flickering around him. He turned to Orunmila, his eyes narrowing. "You." Orunmila stood calmly, his staff glowing faintly. "The fight is over." Shango let out a low laugh, shaking his head as he sat up. "You're the only one who could pull something like this off, Orunmila. Stopping time. Clever. Annoying, but clever." Amadioha exhaled deeply, his frustration evident. "Do you realize how dangerous that was?" "I do," Orunmila said simply. "But the danger of letting this battle continue far outweighed the risk of my intervention." Shango grinned despite his exhaustion. "You're lucky, old man. Another second, and I'd have had him." Amadioha gave Shango a sharp look but said nothing. Orunmila's expression remained steady. "Both of you are extraordinary. You have pushed each other to limits neither of you thought possible. But this clash must end here. The balance cannot afford your powers to spiral any further." Shango raised an eyebrow. "Balance, huh? You and your balance. Always meddling." Orunmila smiled faintly. "It is my purpose." Amadioha stood, his gaze lingering on Orunmila. "What happens now?" "We return," Orunmila said. "There is much to discuss. This battle has revealed much about both of you and what lies ahead." Shango sighed, pushing himself to his feet. "Fine, but next time don't interrupt." Orunmila chuckled softly, his tone light but firm. "Next time don't force me to." With a wave of his staff, Orunmila summoned a portal, its shimmering surface reflecting the faint glow of Akaru's scarred terrain. One by one the gods stepped through, leaving the battered planet behind. For now the battle was over, but the war was only beginning.